Since the time of Muhammad's conquest of Mecca in 630, the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca, has been an obligation upon every believing Muslim. Since then, a lot of traditions regarding Hajj have been developed, maintained and sometimes abandoned. It is about one of these abandoned traditions that this video will be about. And the tradition in question is the tradition of the Mahmal. The Mahmal refers either to a ceremonial passengerless litter that was carried on a camel along caravans of pilgrims on the Hajj, or to the very procession, in addition to the traditions and rituals around this entire litter and the journey to Mecca. This litter and procession was sent by the controllers and thus ultimately the rulers of Mecca through the blessing of the Caliph, the leader of the believers, who would give a sultan, the ruler, the right to send a Mahmal. In the past, the Mahmal was a symbol of the political power of the sultans and the caliphs who sent it, demonstrating their custody of Islam's holy sites in Mecca and Medina. And the Mahmal functioned as a stand-in for the ruler, a delegation representing the ruler's political and religious presence on the Hajj by proxy. The reason for this is that going on Hajj in pre-industrial times could take months to complete, a time where the ruler would be absent from other matters, such as conflicts within their realm or at the borders of their realm, and where if those matters got out of hand, it would be hard to find and reach the ruler in time, as he would be constantly moving and maybe even change routes on his journey to Mecca. Not to mention that journeys in pre-industrial times for a ruler were actually rather risky and could result in ambushes and assassination attempts during the journey, as security would be harder to maintain when moving rather than staying put in a fortified position such as in a castle or in a palace. Because of these reasons, most Muslim rulers did thus not go on Hajj, and if they went it was only once. Hence, they sent a Mahmal instead, and the Mahmal had a lot of traditions and procedures associated with it. First, the procession was given blessings by the rulers and caliphs in the capital through elaborate ceremonial processions. Then, the procession of the Mahmal would be sent on its journey to Mecca, and the procession would include several things and people. It would, for example, include the sumptuous cloths which adorn the Kaaba, the Kiswa al-Kaaba, the robes of the Kaaba, the black clothing around the Holy Rock. Though at times this clothing has also been green rather than black, and yellow as well. And during each Mahmal journey, these clothes would be taken down from the Kaaba and replaced by new ones. By tradition, these clothes were usually made in Egypt. Other items carried by the Mahmal procession included political statements made by the ruler, Qurans to give out as charity, adornments containing prayers and Quranic verses all over the Mahmal litter, gold and silver for donations to the poor and to various mosques that would be given out at certain points in the journey, as the Mahmal procession would be going to and from many cities and towns on the way to Mecca, as the Mahmal procession was a political statement showing that the ruler cared about the religion and about his subjects out in the realm. The Mahmal procession was a diplomatic mission too, so diplomats and representatives of the ruler would meet other diplomatic representatives and rulers that would go on Hajj in order to discuss politics when they met them, on the journey to or in Mecca. Now you might be wondering, when did this tradition begin? When did rulers start sending these Mahmal processions? We know for certain that in Mamluk times, with Baybars being the first clearly recorded example, sending a Mahmal by proxy through the Abbasid caliphs being the first clearly recorded example. But it's possible and even probable that the tradition goes back even further in time. One possible origin of this tradition are in early Mongol practices taken from the Ilkhanate Mongols or from the Turkic Seljuk Empire and their practices, as this tradition of the Mahmal litter is very similar to traditions found in Central Asia regarding sending caravans with a highly decorated litter symbolizing the presence of the ruler by proxy. Also, similar traditions to those found in the Mahmal procedures have existed even before the existence of the Mahmal litter as a common practice. For example, the traditions of adorning the Kaaba with the Kiswa clothing coming from Egypt has its origins in the Shia Fatimid Caliphate that ruled Egypt once. And even earlier, you had the Sunni Abbasid caliphs sending delegations representing them on Hajj by proxy. In fact, the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid was among the last of the Abbasid caliphs to actually visit Mecca in person at least several times. And his processions, and also later proxy processions, would include a lot of diplomats and representatives of the caliph, as well as various gifts of charity to be given out to the people of the land. So by the time of the Mamluks, there were already similar traditions already in place to the Mahmal. And the Mahmal tradition in the Mamluk Sultanate was continued by the Ottoman Empire after the Ottoman Mamluk War of 1516 to 1517, when the Ottomans conquered the Mamluks and the Hijaz region containing Medina and Mecca. And the tradition would be continued by the Ottomans, with the only difference being that the Mahmal now carried the Ottoman Sultanate sigil rather than the Abbasid Caliphal sigil, because the Ottomans saw themselves as being the new caliphs of Sunni Islam, and that the procession started at times from Istanbul rather than from Cairo. Otherwise it was mostly the same, and the tradition would remain until after the fall of the Ottoman sultans, and thus their claim of custodianship of Mecca, when the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished in the 1st of November 1922. After that, the Mahmal tradition would only happen sporadically and not yearly, by various rulers and leaders and private initiatives in the Islamic world that did not control Mecca, sending their versions of the Mahmal procession. And the last Mahmal that would ever be sent to Mecca as an official procession was sent in 1962 from Egypt by a private initiative to keep the tradition of carrying the Kiswa clothing alive to the Kaaba. But it became banned by Gamal Abdel Nasser, at that time the leader of Egypt, marking the end of the tradition to our days. But this begs the question, is it possible for this tradition to return? Will it come back? I would argue that it will not. The first reason is that this entire tradition is very politically sensitive, due to two factors. The first is that sending the Mahmal as a political entity implies overlordship of the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. You have the Hashemites, the royal family of Jordan, that are technically the current custodians of Mecca and Medina, which they have been to various rulers by proxy from the 11th century, acting as vassals under the Mamluks and later the Ottomans. And the custodianship of Mecca and Medina under the Hashemites was also stated in the Sharifiyya solution in 1921. So they could in theory send a Mahmal. But Mecca and Medina are controlled by the Saudi family, as Ibn Saud in 1925 conquered the Hijaz region and thus the cities of Mecca and Medina, making the claim to those cities contested, and thus sending a Mahmal delegation would either not be possible or would lead to diplomatic strain regarding conflicts of the legitimacy and control of those two cities, which neither the Hashemites or the Saudi family wants to do. The second factor is that sending a Mahmal implies Caliphal authority, and even during the Mamluk period of Egypt, when the Mamluks controlled in practice the power, it was still done through the claim of the Abbasid dynasty of being the rulers of all Muslims, even if the Abbasids in practice lacked a lot of power. And during the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman sultans, after having taken over the Mamluk state and disposed of the Abbasids there, they laid claim to being the caliphs, being the leaders of the Muslim world, and thus gave the Mahmal its blessing by being the caliphs. And after 1924, there has been no official caliphate, and sending a Mahmal would be tantamount to saying that you are the leader of all Muslims in the world, which would be quite controversial and scandalous to do without the power to back up that claim, which currently no political entity in the Islamic world has the power or the will to do, in my humble opinion. The second reason is practical as to why a Mahmal delegation will not be sent again. And that is that the need for the Mahmal is gone, as travel time is a lot less today, and if a leader of an Islamic country wants to go to Hajj, he can easily do it within a couple of days using modern transportation. And modern communications technology makes it so that you can easily have diplomatic contacts all across the entire world instantaneously without needing to send delegates and diplomats to Hajj every year. And due to modern media, it is easier to spread your message across vast areas than it was in the past, and thus you don't need to send delegations that go around to various towns and cities with your political messages, which was part of the reason for the Mahmal. So the two reasons as to why the Mahmal as a tradition will not return are that it is politically problematic for it to return, and its practical value is gone. Yet, by talking about this abandoned tradition, I think it demonstrates just how different the past was and what sort of considerations can lie behind various traditions. And I hope you have found this fascinating. If you have any questions, please post them and I will try to respond to them. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.